King Alexander stood at the tall windows of his private study, watching the morning sun cast golden light across the vast gardens of Valdoria Palace. At 52, he still cut an impressive figure, though the weight of ruling the kingdom of Valdoria for over 2 decades had added silver to his dark hair and lines around his sharp blue eyes. The kingdom had prospered under his rule, but lately something felt wrong in his own home. Queen Isabella entered the room without knocking, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She was 45 and still beautiful, with flowing auburn hair and green eyes that could charm anyone. She had married Alexander 15 years ago, becoming his second wife after his first queen died tragically in a riding accident. "Good morning, my dear," Isabella said, her voice sweet as honey. She moved to his side and placed a delicate hand on his arm. "You look troubled. What weighs on your mind?" Alexander turned to face her, studying her expression. "I've been thinking about the upcoming trade negotiations with the eastern provinces. Lord Marcus seems to think we should accept their terms, but something doesn't feel right about it." Isabella's eyes flickered for just a moment before she smiled. "Oh, you worry too much about politics, Alexander. Lord Marcus is very wise. He's guided you well in financial matters for years. Perhaps you should trust his judgment." The king nodded slowly, but doubt lingered in his mind. Lord Marcus Blackwood had indeed been his trusted financial advisor for 8 years, ever since Isabella had recommended him for the position. The man had helped modernize Valdoria's economy and had always seemed loyal, yet lately, Alexander noticed small things that bothered him. "I suppose you're right," Alexander said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I just want what's best for our people." Isabella squeezed his arm gently. "Of course you do. That's what makes you such a wonderful king. Now I must prepare for my meeting with the Ladies' Charitable Foundation. We're planning the autumn charity ball." After she left, Alexander remained by the window, lost in thought. His personal secretary, James Morton, knocked and entered. James had served the royal family for 30 years and was one of the few people the king trusted completely. "Your Majesty, the morning reports," James said, placing a leather folder on the desk. His weathered face showed concern. "There's something I think you should know." Alexander turned from the window. "What is it, James?" The elderly man hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It's about the Queen's activities, sir. I've noticed some unusual patterns in her schedule lately." "Unusual how?" "She's been having many private meetings with Lord Marcus, sir. Always when you're away on official business. And yesterday I saw her leaving the palace through the servants' entrance, dressed in common clothes. She returned 3 hours later the same way." Alexander's jaw tightened. Isabella had never shown interest in dressing down or leaving the palace secretly. "Did you follow her?" "I wouldn't presume to spy on Her Majesty without your permission, sir. But I felt you should be aware." The king was quiet for a long moment. "Keep this between us for now?" "James, but I want you to pay attention to anything else unusual." "Of course, Your Majesty." That afternoon, Alexander attended a council meeting about the kingdom's military budget. Lord Marcus sat at the long oak table, presenting figures and charts with his usual confidence. The man was in his early 40s, handsome and well-spoken, with dark hair and calculating gray eyes. "As you can see, Your Majesty, our current military spending is quite high," Marcus explained. "I recommend reducing the budget by 30%. We could invest that money in trade agreements instead. The eastern provinces offer excellent opportunities." General William Hayes, the kingdom's military commander, frowned. "With respect, Lord Marcus, reducing our military strength now would be unwise. Our neighbors have been expanding their armies. We need to maintain our defenses." Marcus smiled smoothly. "General Hayes, I understand your concerns, but wars are fought with economics now, not just swords. Strong trade partnerships provide better security than weapons. Alexander listened to both men but found himself questioning Marcus's logic. Valdoria had always maintained a strong military, and it had served them well. Lord Marcus, these Eastern Province agreements, what exactly do they offer us? Primarily access to their markets, Your Majesty. They have resources we need, and we have goods they want. It's a perfect partnership. And what would we be giving them in return? Marcus shuffled through his papers. Some mining rights in our northern territories, access to our ports, and preferential trading status. General Hayes leaned forward. Your Majesty, those mining rights include areas near our military installations. Giving foreigners access to those regions could compromise our security. The general worries too much, Marcus said with a dismissive wave. The eastern provinces are peaceful traders, not invaders. After the meeting, Alexander walked through the palace halls, his mind churning. The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. Why was Isabella so supportive of Marcus's suggestions? Why did they meet privately so often? And why had she been sneaking out of the palace? That evening at dinner, Alexander decided to test his wife's knowledge. The royal dining room was grand, with crystal chandeliers and paintings of previous kings adorning the walls. Isabella sat across from him, beautiful as always in an emerald green gown. I had an interesting discussion with Lord Marcus today about the eastern provinces, Alexander said casually as they ate. He seems to know quite a lot about their internal politics. Isabella paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. Does he? Well, he is very well informed about foreign affairs. Yes. He mentioned something about their new mining regulations. Apparently, they're very eager to expand their operations. He seemed to know details that weren't in any of our intelligence reports. Perhaps he has his own sources of information, Isabella suggested, but her voice had become slightly strained. Alexander studied her face. Perhaps. Though it's curious how much time you two spend discussing these matters. Isabella's cheeks flushed slightly. I hardly see what you mean. We occasionally discuss kingdom business. Nothing more. Of course, Alexander said, but he made a mental note of her defensive reaction. Later that night, as Isabella slept beside him, Alexander lay awake staring at the ceiling. 24 years of ruling had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The next morning, Alexander summoned Captain Robert Sterling, head of the Royal Guard. Sterling was a loyal soldier who had served the crown for 15 years. He was known for his discretion and unwavering loyalty. Captain, I need you to undertake a special assignment, Alexander said in his private office. I want you to discreetly observe Queen Isabella's activities. Note who she meets with, where she goes, and what she does. But this must remain completely secret. Sterling's expression remained professional, despite the unusual request. Of course, Your Majesty. May I ask what has prompted this concern? Let's just say I've noticed some inconsistencies that need explanation. I trust your judgment, Captain. Use your most reliable men, but keep the circle small. Understood, sir. We'll begin immediately. Over the next 3 days, Alexander continued his royal duties while waiting for Sterling's report. He attended state dinners, met with foreign ambassadors, and reviewed kingdom finances. But his mind kept returning to Isabella and Marcus. On the third evening, Sterling requested a private meeting. They met in Alexander's study after midnight, when the palace was quiet. Your Majesty, I have some disturbing information, Sterling began, his face grave. The Queen has been meeting regularly with Lord Marcus, always in locations away from the palace. Yesterday, they met in a small tavern in the merchant district. Alexander felt his stomach tighten. What did they discuss? My man couldn't get close enough to hear everything, but he did catch fragments. They were discussing something about the final phase and timing being crucial. Lord Marcus mentioned that the Eastern arrangements are almost complete. Anything else? Sterling hesitated. There's more, sir. The Queen also met with a stranger, a man our intelligence doesn't recognize. He appeared to be from the Eastern provinces based on his clothing and accent. They exchanged what looked like documents. Alexander stood and began pacing. His worst fears were taking shape, but he needed more evidence before acting. I want you to increase surveillance, but remain undetected, and I want to know everything about Lord Marcus's communications with the Eastern provinces. Sir, if I may suggest, we should also investigate Lord Marcus's financial records. If there's treachery involved, there's likely money changing hands. Good thinking. Do it. But be careful. If they suspect we're watching, they might accelerate whatever they're planning. The next few days were torture for Alexander. He had to act normally around Isabella, sharing meals and conversations, while knowing she might be plotting against him and their kingdom. Isabella seemed her usual charming self, but now Alexander noticed small things, how she avoided his eyes sometimes, how she seemed nervous when he mentioned certain topics. Lord Marcus continued attending council meetings, offering his advice with the same smooth confidence. But Alexander now heard his suggestions differently. Every recommendation seemed designed to weaken Valdoria's position or benefit the eastern provinces. During one particularly tense council session, Marcus again pushed for the military budget cuts. Your Majesty, maintaining such a large army is expensive and unnecessary. The money could be better spent on infrastructure that would benefit trade. General Hayes argued back. Lord Marcus, you speak as if military strength is irrelevant. But history shows that weakness invites aggression. Our ancestors built this kingdom through strength, not just commerce. Times change, General, Marcus replied coolly. Modern kingdoms prosper through alliance and trade, not threats of force. Alexander watched the exchange carefully. Marcus's arguments sounded reasonable on the surface, but they would leave Valdoria vulnerable. Lord Marcus, these infrastructure projects you propose, who would build them? I've identified several excellent contractors from the eastern provinces. They offer competitive prices and superior craftsmanship. Foreign contractors working on our infrastructure, Alexander mused aloud. They would have access to strategic locations throughout the kingdom. Marcus's smile never wavered. Your Majesty, you sound as suspicious as the general. These are simple business arrangements, nothing more. But Alexander was beginning to see the pattern. Military cuts, foreign contractors with access to strategic sites, mining rights near military bases, trade agreements that favored the eastern provinces. Taken together, it looked like a systematic plan to weaken Valdoria from within. That evening, Alexander received another report from Captain Sterling. This one confirmed his darkest suspicions. Your Majesty, we intercepted a message from Lord Marcus to someone in the eastern provinces. Our code breakers worked on it all day. The message discusses Phase 3 being ready to begin and mentions that the Queen has secured the King's trust in our recommendations. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. What else? There's reference to a timeline, sir. Something significant is planned for the autumn equinox. That's only 2 weeks away. And, sir... Sterling paused, looking uncomfortable. Tell me. The message refers to removing the obstacle to full implementation. Given the context, we believe they're referring to you, Your Majesty. Alexander sank into his chair. His own wife and trusted advisor were plotting not just against his kingdom, but against his life. The woman he had loved and trusted for 15 years was planning his destruction. Captain, I need time to think about our next move. Continue surveillance, but prepare for the possibility that we may need to act quickly. And Sterling, tell no one else about this. If word reaches the wrong ears, it could trigger whatever they're planning. After Sterling left, Alexander sat alone in his study, staring at the evidence before him. Outside, a storm was gathering, lightning flickering across the dark sky. It seemed fitting. A storm was gathering inside the palace walls as well. He thought about Isabella, how beautiful she had looked when they first met, how she had comforted him after his first wife's death. Had it all been an act? Had she been planning this betrayal from the beginning? The thought made him feel sick, but personal feelings had to wait. He was a king first, and his duty was to protect his kingdom and his people. Whatever plan Isabella and Marcus had devised for the autumn equinox, he had to stop it. The question was how to do it without alerting them to his knowledge. Alexander picked up his pen and began writing notes, planning his counter-strategy. The next 2 weeks would determine the fate of Valdoria. He had to be smart, careful, and ready to act when the moment came. The storm outside grew stronger, rain lashing against the windows. Inside the palace, King Alexander prepared for the most important battle of his reign, a battle against the people he had trusted most. The following morning brought no relief from the storm, and Alexander's mood matched the gray skies. He had barely slept, his mind racing through possible scenarios and strategies. Every option seemed to carry enormous risk. Act too early, and they might escape justice. Wait too long, and their plan might succeed. James Morton arrived with the morning reports as usual, but Alexander noticed his longtime secretary's hands trembling slightly as he set down the papers. "James, you look troubled. What's wrong?" The elderly man glanced toward the door nervously, before speaking in a low voice. "Your Majesty, I may have overheard something last night that you should know about." Alexander gestured for him to continue. "I was working late in the document archive when I heard voices in the hallway. It was Queen Isabella and Lord Marcus. They didn't know anyone was nearby." James paused, clearly uncomfortable with reporting on the Queen. "Your Majesty, they were discussing your upcoming hunting trip to the northern forest." Alexander's blood ran cold. He had planned to visit the Northern Hunting Lodge in 3 days, a tradition he had maintained for years. It was a peaceful retreat where he could think and plan away from court politics. What exactly did they say? Lord Marcus said something about the perfect opportunity and no witnesses in the forest. The Queen seemed worried about timing, but Marcus assured her that the Eastern friends would be ready to move immediately afterward. The implications hit Alexander like a physical blow. They weren't planning to wait until the autumn equinox. They intended to eliminate him during his hunting trip. With him dead, Isabella would become regent until his young nephew came of age, giving her and Marcus complete control over the kingdom. "James, cancel my hunting trip immediately. Tell everyone I've come down with a sudden illness that requires rest." "Of course, Your Majesty. Should I alert Captain Sterling?" "Not yet. I need to think this through carefully." After James left, Alexander began formulating a more aggressive plan. Waiting and watching was no longer an option. He had to take control of the situation. But he needed irrefutable proof of their treachery before he could act openly. That afternoon, Alexander made a difficult decision. He would pretend to be ill while secretly investigating the conspiracy more deeply. He sent word that he was confined to his chambers with a fever and would see no one except Isabella and his personal physician. Dr. Edmund Carruthers, the royal physician, was summoned to maintain the illusion. The doctor was an old family friend who had served the royal family for 20 years, and Alexander trusted him completely. "Edmund, I need your help with a delicate matter," Alexander explained when they were alone. "I'm not actually ill, but I need everyone to believe I am. Can you support this fiction?" Dr. Carruthers raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty. May I ask why?" Alexander briefed him on the basics of the situation. The doctor's expression grew increasingly grave as he learned about the suspected plot. "My God!" Alexander, if this is true, the doctor had been permitted to use the king's first name in private since they were childhood friends. It is true, and I need to gather enough evidence to stop them before they try something else. What do you need from me? Keep up the pretense that I'm seriously ill. It will buy me time and might cause them to reveal more about their plans. When Isabella visited that evening, Alexander played his part perfectly. He lay in bed looking pale and weak, while Dr. Carruthers hovered nearby looking concerned. "Oh, my poor darling," Isabella said, her voice full of apparent worry as she sat beside the bed. "You look terrible. What can I do to help you recover?" Alexander studied her face carefully. If he hadn't known better, he would have believed her concern was genuine. She was an excellent actress. "Just knowing you're here helps," he said weakly. "I'm sorry about the hunting trip. I was so looking forward to it." For just an instant, he thought he saw disappointment flash across her features before she composed herself. "Don't worry about that now. Your health is what matters most. You just rest and get better." After she left, Alexander felt sick for real. 15 years of marriage, and she could fake concern for his well-being while planning his murder. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Captain Sterling arrived later that night, disguised as a servant. Alexander had requested this meeting to plan the next phase of his investigation. "Your Majesty, our surveillance has revealed more disturbing information," Sterling reported quietly. "Lord Marcus has been receiving regular communications from someone calling himself the Eastern Hand. We believe this is a high-ranking official from the eastern provinces." "What kind of communications?" "Coded messages mostly, but we've broken some of them. They discuss troop movements and something called the Valdoria Initiative. Sir, we think the eastern provinces are planning to invade, and Lord Marcus is helping them from within." Alexander clenched his fists. It was worse than he had imagined. "What about Isabella's involvement?" "She's been meeting with foreign agents, sir. Men who arrive secretly and leave the same way. One of my men followed her to an abandoned warehouse yesterday. She stayed for 2 hours. I want to know what happened in that warehouse. Can we search it?" "Already done, sir. We found maps of the kingdom with strategic points marked, including the palace layout and guard positions. There were also documents discussing how to handle the transition of power." Alexander stood and began pacing despite his supposed illness. The evidence was mounting, but he still needed something that would convince the entire court of the conspiracy. Many nobles respected Lord Marcus and loved Queen Isabella. He couldn't move against them without absolute proof. "Captain, I want you to arrange a special operation. Tomorrow night I want your best men to secretly observe the Queen's next meeting. But this time, I want them to get close enough to hear everything and, if possible, obtain documents. That's very risky, sir. If they're discovered, the risk of doing nothing is greater. We're running out of time." The next day, Alexander maintained his facade of illness while his mind raced with preparations. He trusted Sterling and his men, but he also knew that Isabella and Marcus were intelligent and careful. If his people were caught spying, it would trigger whatever backup plan they had. That evening, as rain continued to lash the windows, Alexander waited in his darkened chamber for Sterling's return. Dr. Carruthers sat with him, both men tense with anticipation. Near midnight, Sterling slipped into the room through a secret passage that few people knew existed. His face was grim but triumphant. "We have it, Your Majesty. Everything we need." Sterling spread several documents on the table and lit a small lamp. "My men were able to get very close to their meeting tonight. They met in the old chapel ruins outside the city. Present were the Queen, Lord Marcus, and 3 men we've identified as Eastern Province military officers." Alexander leaned forward eagerly. "What did you learn?" "The invasion is planned for next week, sir. While the kingdom mourned your supposed death from the hunting accident, Eastern troops would cross our borders at 3 points. Lord Marcus has arranged for key military installations to be unmanned or understaffed at crucial times. And Isabella's role? She would announce your death and declare a period of mourning and emergency rule. As Queen Regent, she would invite Eastern peacekeepers to help maintain order. Once they were inside our defenses, the occupation would be complete. Dr. Carruthers shook his head in disbelief. 15 years of planning. She must have been working toward this since she married you, Alexander. Sterling continued. We also discovered that your first wife's death may not have been an accident, sir. One of the Eastern officers made a reference to the successful first operation that brought our asset into position. Alexander felt his world spin. His beloved first wife, Queen Margaret, murdered to make way for Isabella. The woman he had trusted and loved had not only betrayed him, but might have killed his first wife as well. There's more, sir, Sterling said gently. We obtained copies of several documents. He showed Alexander papers covered in Isabella's handwriting. These include detailed plans for governing Valdoria as an eastern province, lists of nobles who would be eliminated as threats to peace, and... Sterling hesitated. Tell me. Plans for your nephew Prince David's eventual accident once he came of age. They never intended for the true royal line to survive. Alexander stared at the documents, his hands shaking with rage. They hadn't just planned to kill him, they intended to wipe out his entire family line and turn his beloved kingdom into a conquered territory. We also have this, Sterling said, producing a small device. One of my men is skilled with new recording technology. We captured their entire conversation tonight. Alexander listened to the recording with growing horror. Isabella's voice, cold and calculating, discussing his death as casually as planning a dinner party. Lord Marcus outlining invasion routes. Eastern officers talking about dividing Valdoria's wealth among themselves. But most chilling was Isabella's response when Marcus asked if she felt any regret about the plan. Alexander was useful for legitimizing my position, but he's become an obstacle. I've played the loving wife long enough. It's time to claim what we've worked for. When the recording ended, the room was silent, except for the rain against the windows. Alexander felt as though his heart had been ripped from his chest. 15 years of his life had been built on lies. Dr. Carruthers placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, my friend. I can't imagine how you must feel. Alexander straightened, pushing aside his personal pain. How I feel doesn't matter now. What matters is stopping them and protecting our people. He turned to Sterling. Captain, I want you to quietly alert General Hayes and gather our most trusted officers. Tell them to prepare for immediate action, but maintain absolute secrecy. What are your orders, sir? Tomorrow morning, I want both Isabella and Marcus arrested simultaneously. We'll present the evidence to the full court. But first, I want our military to secure all strategic locations they've compromised. Sterling nodded. What about the Eastern Province agents still in the kingdom? Round them up as well. We'll hold them as evidence of the conspiracy. And the invasion force approaching our borders? Alexander smiled grimly. General Hayes has been wanting to test our military readiness. He'll get his chance. But first, we cut off the head of this conspiracy. The next few hours were spent in careful preparation. Messages were sent through secure channels to trusted officers throughout the kingdom. Alexander's most loyal guards were positioned at key points in the palace. Everything had to happen simultaneously to prevent any escape or countermeasures. As dawn approached, Alexander finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what was about to happen. In a few hours, he would confront the woman who had shared his bed for 15 years, the woman he had trusted with his deepest secrets, the woman who had planned his murder. Dr. Carruthers prepared him for the day ahead. You'll need to appear strong and decisive, Alexander. The court will be shocked, and you'll need to project absolute confidence in your evidence. I know. The hardest part will be looking at her face when she realizes her plan has failed. Are you ready for this? Alexander gazed out the window at the sunrise, its light cutting through the storm clouds. I have to be. Too many lives depend on it. As the palace began to wake for what everyone thought would be a normal day, Alexander made his final preparations. In 2 hours, he would reveal the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy everything he held dear. The confrontation that would determine the fate of Valdoria was about to begin. He thought of his nephew, Prince David, safe in his studies and unaware of how close he had come to death. He thought of his people, who trusted their king to protect them from threats both foreign and domestic. And he thought of his first wife, Margaret, whose memory deserved justice. Whatever personal pain this day would bring, Alexander was ready to face it. The time for deception and hidden planning was over. The truth would finally come to light. The great hall of Valdoria Palace had never felt more tense. Alexander sat on his throne, appearing fully recovered from his supposed illness, much to the surprise of everyone present. The morning court session had been called with unusual urgency, and nobles, ministers, and officials filled the vast chamber, their voices buzzing with curiosity and concern. Isabella entered the hall looking radiant in a deep blue gown, her auburn hair perfectly arranged. She smiled at the assembled court as she made her way to her throne beside Alexander's. Lord Marcus followed behind her, confident and composed as always, taking his place among the senior advisers. Neither of them suspected that their carefully constructed world was about to crumble. "My lords and ladies," Alexander began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "I have called this emergency session to address a matter of utmost importance to our kingdom's security." Isabella leaned toward him with apparent concern. "My dear, should you be holding court so soon after your illness? You were so weak just yesterday." Alexander looked directly into her eyes, seeing the performance for what it was. "I feel much better now, my dear wife. In fact, I've never seen more clearly." Something in his tone made Isabella's smile falter slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Alexander continued, "Captain Sterling, please bring in the evidence we discussed." Sterling and several guards entered, carrying boxes of documents and the recording device. The sight of armed guards in the throne room created a stir among the assembled nobles. Lord Marcus stepped forward, his smooth politician's voice carrying a note of concern. "Your Majesty, surely these security measures are unnecessary for a normal court session." "This is not a normal court session, Lord Marcus," Alexander replied coldly. "Please remain where you are." Isabella's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this? You're frightening our guests." "The meaning, Isabella, is justice." Alexander stood from his throne, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the hall. "For too long, enemies have walked among us, pretending friendship while planning destruction." He gestured to Sterling, who began displaying maps and documents for the court to see. "What you see before you is evidence of a conspiracy so vast and treacherous that it challenges the very foundation of our kingdom." General Hayes, who had been positioned strategically near the doors, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, our investigation has uncovered a plot involving foreign agents, planned invasion, and—" He paused dramatically. "The planned assassination of the king." The hall erupted in shocked gasps and murmurs. Several nobles called out in disbelief. Lord Marcus's composure finally cracked. "This is preposterous. Your Majesty, surely you don't believe these wild accusations?" "I believe the evidence, Lord Marcus, and the evidence tells a very clear story." Alexander nodded to Sterling, who activated the recording device. Isabella's voice filled the great hall, cold and calculating. Alexander was useful for legitimizing my position, but he's become an obstacle. I've played the loving wife long enough. It's time to claim what we've worked for." The effect was devastating. Isabella swayed as if she might faint, while Lord Marcus's face went ashen. The assembled court stared in stunned silence as more of the recording played, revealing details of the invasion plan and discussions of eliminating the royal family. "No," Isabella whispered, but her voice carried in the silent hall. "That's not... You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Alexander said, his voice heavy with pain and anger. "I understand that the woman I trusted, the woman I loved, has been planning my death for years. I understand that you may have murdered my first wife to position yourself for this betrayal." Isabella's mask finally slipped completely. The gentle, loving queen was gone, replaced by someone cold and desperate. "You fool! Do you think your little kingdom can survive alone? The eastern provinces offer strength, prosperity, a future. I was trying to save Valdoria from your weak leadership." The admission sent another shockwave through the court. Several nobles called out in anger, while others seemed too stunned to react. Lord Marcus, realizing that denial was useless, tried a different approach. "Your Majesty, if you would just listen to reason. The eastern provinces don't seek conquest. They offer partnership, a union that would benefit both kingdoms." General Hayes stepped forward with more documents. "Partnership? These are your military assessments, Lord Marcus. Plans for dividing our army's equipment among eastern forces. Lists of our nobles marked for removal. Orders for the eventual execution of Prince David. What kind of partnership involves murdering the royal family?" Marcus's confident facade crumbled entirely. "You don't understand the bigger picture. Valdoria is small, vulnerable. We needed protection." "We needed loyalty," Alexander said firmly. "We needed advisors who served Valdoria, not foreign masters." Isabella suddenly straightened, her green eyes flashing with defiance. "You think you've won? Do you really believe stopping us will end this? The eastern armies are already moving. Your precious kingdom will fall whether I'm here to help or not." Captain Sterling stepped forward. "Actually, Your Majesty, I have an update on that situation. General Hayes and I coordinated our response this morning. The Eastern invasion force was met at our borders by our full military strength. Thanks to the intelligence we gathered, we knew exactly where they planned to cross. The invasion has been repelled, and several high-ranking Eastern officers have been captured." Isabella's face went white. "Impossible. You were supposed to be dead. The military was supposed to be leaderless and confused. Instead, we were prepared and united," Alexander replied. "Your conspiracy gave us something valuable, the knowledge of exactly what threats we faced." Lord Marcus made a desperate final plea. "Your Majesty, I can still be useful. I know all their plans, all their agents. Spare me, and I'll help you root out every trace of their influence." Alexander's expression was granite hard. "You had your chance to serve Valdoria honestly, Marcus. You chose treachery instead." He turned to address the full court. "Let this serve as a lesson to any who would betray our kingdom. We will defend ourselves against all enemies, foreign and domestic." The king gestured to Captain Sterling. "Arrest them both. They will be held for trial on charges of high treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and collaboration with enemy forces." As the guards moved forward, Isabella made one last desperate move. "Alexander, wait! Everything I did was for us, for our future together. The eastern provinces promised we could rule together, stronger than ever." "You destroyed our future the moment you chose betrayal over loyalty," Alexander replied sadly. "I loved you, Isabella, but I love Valdoria more." The guards placed iron shackles on both conspirators. Isabella struggled briefly, her composure finally completely shattered. "This isn't over. You've only delayed the inevitable. Valdoria will fall." "Perhaps," Alexander said quietly. But not today, and not through treachery. As they were led away, the great hall remained silent for several long moments. Finally, Duke William Ashford, one of the senior nobles, spoke up. "Your Majesty, how can we trust anyone now? If the Queen herself could betray us, how do we know who else might be compromised?" Alexander had anticipated this question. "Duke Ashford, that is exactly why we must be stronger and more united than ever. Captain Sterling, please present the final evidence." Sterling displayed a list of names. "During our investigation, we identified every person who was approached by the conspiracy. Some, like Lord Marcus, chose treason, but many others immediately reported the approaches to proper authorities. These loyal subjects helped us gather much of our evidence." Alexander nodded approvingly. Lord Peter Whitmore, when approached about supporting the plot, immediately informed General Hayes. Lady Catherine Norris refused Eastern gold and brought their letters directly to Captain Sterling. These and dozens of others proved that loyalty to Valdoria runs deep. The revelation helped ease some of the tension in the room. Several nobles smiled and nodded approvingly at their colleagues who had proven their loyalty. "Furthermore," Alexander continued, "this crisis has shown us where our true strengths lie. Our military performed brilliantly, our intelligence network proved effective, and our people showed that they cannot be easily corrupted." General Hayes stepped forward with a final report. "Your Majesty, the captured Eastern officers have provided valuable information. It appears this conspiracy was years in the making, with agents placed in several neighboring kingdoms. However, Valdoria was their primary target because of our strategic location and resources." "What of the other kingdoms?" asked Duke Ashford. "We're sharing our intelligence with our genuine allies. Together, we'll root out the Eastern Province network throughout the region." Alexander felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The immediate crisis was over, but the work of rebuilding trust and security would take time. Dr. Carruthers, who had been present throughout the proceedings, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, if I may, the court has seen evidence of the conspiracy, but they should also know how it was uncovered. Your willingness to investigate despite personal cost, your careful planning, and your protection of innocent lives. These actions show the true character of a king." The assembled nobles murmured their agreement. Several called out, "Long live the king!" and soon the entire hall was echoing with the chant. Alexander raised his hand for silence. "The praise belongs to everyone who remained loyal and worked to protect our kingdom. Captain Sterling and his men, General Hayes and our soldiers, and all of you who chose duty over personal gain." As the formal proceedings concluded, Alexander felt a mixture of relief and profound sadness. The conspiracy was ended, the kingdom was safe, but his personal life lay in ruins. 15 years of marriage revealed as an elaborate deception, his trust shattered, his heart broken. James Morton approached as the hall began to empty. "Your Majesty, what shall we do about the Queen's possessions and quarters?" Alexander sighed. "Have everything searched for evidence? Then seal her chambers. History will judge what to do with the rest." That evening, Alexander stood once again at the windows of his study, looking out over his kingdom. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and clear. In the distance, he could see lights in the village windows, his people safe and unaware of how close they had come to losing their freedom. Captain Sterling knocked and entered. "Your Majesty, the prisoners are secure. The trials will begin next week. And the investigation into Queen Margaret's death. We're reopening that case based on what we've learned. It may take time, but we'll find the truth." Alexander nodded. "She deserves justice, even after all these years." Dr. Carruthers joined them, carrying a cup of medicinal tea. "You need rest, Alexander. This has been an enormous strain." "I'm fine, Edmund. Actually, for the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe clearly." Sterling hesitated, then spoke. "Sir, if I may ask..." How are you handling the personal aspects of all this? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. It hurts more than I can express, but I've learned something important. I confused love with trust and loyalty with affection. A king cannot afford such confusion. Will you consider remarrying eventually? Dr. Carruthers asked gently. Perhaps someday. But this time I'll choose someone whose loyalty to Valdoria matches my own. Personal feelings, while important, cannot come before duty to the kingdom. As his friends left him to rest, Alexander remained at the window. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, trials to oversee, security measures to implement, relationships with other kingdoms to rebuild. But tonight he could simply be grateful that Valdoria survived. He thought of Isabella sitting in a prison cell, probably still convinced that her actions were justified. He thought of Lord Marcus, perhaps finally understanding the true cost of betrayal. And he thought of his people, asleep in their beds, protected by the loyalty of those who truly understood what service meant. The king of Valdoria had faced the greatest test of his reign and emerged stronger. His kingdom was secure, his enemies defeated, and his conscience clear. For a ruler, there could be no greater victory. As Alexander finally prepared for bed, he made a silent promise to his first wife's memory and to his people. He would never again allow personal feelings to cloud his judgment about threats to the kingdom. Valdoria would remain strong, free, and proud under his rule. The conspiracy was over, but the true work of kingship would continue. And King Alexander was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.